Welcome back to the Matt side. Richard Mann here with Clay Sauertig. We are going to break down the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club matches on Rokfin. Clay, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Nice to have some wrestling back in back-to-back weekends. Starting to get into the thick of things, hopefully with some high school wrestling picking up here, and then maybe college wrestling. So it's nice to feel some sort of normalcy in the wrestling world.
Right, and speaking of coming back, last time was our first one back in a long time here on the Matt side, so we're going to be YouTube going forward. If you like the video, like it, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm sure if you watch the video, you know that. So I always like to start off with just our initial impressions from the event. This was the first major event for Rokfin, and Nittany Lion Wrestling Club put on a great show. So my one positive was I thought that it was kind of very honest in what it was. There was a bunch of matches, and they ran them basically back to back. They didn't try to make it huge with a bunch of fanfare. I thought for hardcore wrestling fans, it was great. It moved. My one negative, and it stands out, the reason why we're doing this here on Tuesday afternoon is that it took them a long time to get the replay up. So that's probably something they'll iron out, but I just kind of find that annoying because I was not able to watch it live. How about you? Do you have any initial, positive, negatives?
I think you really hit on the one thing that was really impressive to me was the logistics of all of it. Like, it felt like as soon as the previous match was walking off, you saw the other two kind of come into screen. They gave you a little bit of background between Jeff Byers and David Taylor about who you were about to watch, and then they were right back into the action. So there really wasn't much in terms of, it came in probably at about an hour 45 for 13 matches, which you talk to most wrestling fans, I think somewhere between 90 minutes, 2 hours, which is what you normally get in the college tours, about what they want in terms of time and the amount of matches. So I was really impressed with that. And like you said, the stream was crisp, which was nice, but it would have been nice if they could be archived a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and I thought commentary was another thing I should hit on because I really enjoyed it. David Taylor was doing color, and Jeff Byer was doing the play-by-play. And, I thought it was a good mix. I think in wrestling, too often, the play-by-play is just another color person, and I think that they kind of stayed in their lane, and I think that was pretty refreshing compared to some of the other broadcasts where everybody's a former wrestler or everybody's a color guy or everybody's a play-by-play.
Yeah, I think that's what you get when you have somebody whose job is literally to call sporting events and to call matches. And when you have somebody with as much experience as Jeff Byers, you're going to get somebody that kind of takes control of their broadcast and leads the color guy where they need to be. And the same sometimes can be said when you watch trials on NBC. But, so many other times, regardless of who's carrying the matches, this is not a shot at anybody, it's not somebody that has a background in play-by-play.
All right, so let's start with the first match. Rick Durso, former All-American for Franklin and Marshall, taking on Malik Amine, recently of Michigan University and competing internationally for San Marino. Durso had been out of action for a very long time. I didn't see any results for him, at least in over a year, maybe two, and he looked great. He scored 5 takedowns in the first period for the 10-0 victory by superiority. He scored on leg attacks. He scored on drags. Just basically scoring from wherever he wanted. It was impressive stuff.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the most impressive thing to me is, like you said, you're talking going back almost an Olympic cycle, I want to say, since he's really been on the scene. And Malik Amine has been around a good bit, been wrestling in some overseas tournaments for San Marino. And Durso looked like he hadn't missed a beat. It was very, very impressive. Not only that he was in great shape, but also the number of attacks that he was able to kind of chain together.
Yeah, I thought one thing I really wanted to highlight was Amine was able to get to a body lock at one point and lift Durso off the ground, and Durso was able to get his feet back down and not give up points. So even though he was the one pressing forward and dictating the action, he also was able to defend when he needed to. So it really was, complete.
I kept kind of waiting for Durso, who had not competed in a while, to kind of settle in, maybe start to fade, and it just didn't happen. I was really, really impressed with not only the ability to score, but the ability to kind of finish off the match. I kept waiting for things to turn around, and it never did.
Absolutely. So, 2 guys there, veteran competitors at this point, looking good for Rick Durso. Amine probably needs to go back to the drawing board because it's probably not the result he was looking for. Let's move up the card, and we'll move up to the heavyweights. Nick Nevills Penn State guy, has now finished his college eligibility, took on Jordan Wood, who still has a year at Lehigh. Wood got on the board early with a shot clock point, and then Nevills had a 2 for a takedown, and then on a gut wrench. And then in the second period was all Wood. He got himself a step out of bounds, and then 2 exposures at the end of the match to take it 6-4. I kind of thought that Nevills would have a lot more trouble in this match. I thought that Wood is usually pretty good at taking on guys who are bigger and maybe a bit slower. And I think early on, Nevills really impressed me because he did seem that even though he was the bigger guy, he seemed able to match Wood on a athletic and quickness perspective. You know, the very first takedown of the match, Wood basically tried to dive out, and Nickal stayed with him. Unfortunately, it kind of ran out in the second period. What was your takeaway here?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal standpoint, it's nice to see Nick Nevills healthy, which has not really been the case for 5 years, really, since his true freshman year when he broke his foot, and it's kind of been in the Penn State lineup. But I think what you saw was against a very seasoned guy in Jordan Wood. I know it's kind of weird to say for a guy that's still in college, but Jordan Wood wrestled a number of high-level, at least domestically high-level freestyle matches already. It was nice to see the Nick Nevills that people kind of remembered from early in his career, because he was, I mean, an elite recruit and a pretty athletic guy for his size coming into Penn State, and showed it in flashes with the injuries that kind of held him up. Was able to get on the board there early, able to go up 4-0, but I felt that Wood was kind of able to dictate things a little bit better, and it showed later in the match when tiredness kind of came into play. So I think the result was probably fair on the balance of the match. But again, it was nice to see Nichols back out there, back healthy, and nice to see a reminder of just how good Jordan Wood can be.
Absolutely. I think, you know, like I said, Wood has another year, and I do think, though, that his future is probably in freestyle. He's always seemed to had better freestyle results than full style results, in my opinion. I do think that he's sort of entering into the freestyle ladder at a time when it really is a heavyweight renaissance. So he may struggle to make teams, but I do think he's a guy who's going to be on the ladder and, you know, a tough out for years to come. And I'm looking forward to it because, you know, as a former heavyweight myself, I like to see the guys who make the heavyweight division exciting. And I think Wood's always been one of those guys.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about that with Wood is in another generation, say 10 years back or so, you're looking at a guy that might be, I mean, Terrell aside, the face of the team for a little while at that weight. And now, like you said, it's just such a strong time at heavyweight. It's going to be interesting to see where he factors in, but just a really talented guy.
All right, so our next match was at 62 kilograms, Jennifer Page taking on Desiree Zavala. Last time we talked about the crazy match between Joe Colon and Seth Gross. This was maybe not on that level, but I think this was the crazy shootout on this card. Zavala actually got up to a 10-0 lead momentarily. There was continuation on her four-pointer that allowed Page to get 2 as a takedown, and that avoided the match termination. And she came all the way back to win it 14-10, including scoring 8 straight points in the second period to put it away. So it was a very impressive comeback. Zavala looked great early. I think it was partially her running out of gas, but I think also it was partially Paige figuring it out. She tried to go, Zavala did, she tried to go for the same takedown she used to start the match, and Paige was able to keep her balance and get her wrist back and avoid sort of like a fireman's throw. And I think from then, she was in the driver's seat pretty much and put the match away.
Yeah, this match was bananas. I mean, you always love to see the old comeback from 10-0. It's like finding a 4-leaf clover.
Right, yeah.
It just happens so rarely. I mean, how many opportunities present themselves for something like that? But I think you pointed out it was a little bit of gas tank, but I think mostly it was just Paige kind of, once she got her wits about her, kind of staying within herself and slowly just kind of picking herself back. Because it was, I think she scored 4 points quickly after being down 10-0, 2 on the continuation, and rolled it through again to make it 10-4. And at that point, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm in this match. I need to work my way back, and just consistently got to her attacks and was able to score. For me, it was the match of the night in terms of entertainment factor. I don't think too many people would argue. And just a really good showing. And it's also like, it's really nice to see multiple women's matches on these cards, which we'll see later on. Same on Beat Streets, because matches like this just show, I mean, again, it's the best match of the night for me. Just how entertaining it can be when you get these ladies that are so athletic and have so many different ways to score on these cards.
Absolutely. It was wide out from the start. And, you know, I think it was a different style than a lot of the matches on this card. And I think that contributed to the wide openness. And, you know, as fans, we definitely benefited. And, you know, I think Paige looked great. So I'm excited to see her going forward. I wasn't really too familiar with her work going forward, but I was very impressed with her ability to adapt on the fly and make the comeback.
Yeah, you have a really good weight there at 62 kilos too. So it's going to be interesting to see how she factors in, as well as Zavala going forward, because Zavala's still really young.
Absolutely. All right, so we move up to 196 pounds. Olympic silver medalist Jaime Espinal taking on Domenic Abounader. I thought it was kind of funny. David Taylor just called Espinal out right off the bat, saying he wasn't in as good a shape as he'd been before, which I thought was kind of funny. But I think he probably meant like form, like he wasn't in his Olympic medal winning form, but he just said it as, yeah, he's not really in shape right now. He did score a 2 in the first period after giving up a shot clock point to Abounader, but then Abounader came back with a takedown of his own and a leg lace. And then the second period, there were some times where Espinal was looking to create action, but mostly Abounader was controlling space, and he scored a takedown, or I guess it was an exposure in a scramble at the end of the match. Abounader's a guy who, when he was at Michigan, he always looked great in folk style, but he's had better results since moving into freestyle and competing internationally. And I think that this is a good test for both guys to see where they are. And I think for Espinal, he's really got to get back into form, like Dave Taylor was saying. And Abounader, he seems to be on an upward trajectory. And it'll be interesting to see him coming up in the Olympics.
Yeah, I think you kind of saw what Taylor was talking about in this match. And the Espinal didn't look bad per se. He just looked like somebody that might have said, how long has this match or this card been planned? 5 weeks, 6 weeks since it was announced. Mm-hmm. It had the feel of a guy 5 weeks out that they said, hey, Jaime, do you want to wrestle on this card, as opposed to a guy that's been training nonstop in Abounader, who just kind of came out and put in what I thought was a very workmanlike performance. And like I said, with Jennifer Page, was kind of within himself and wrestled for 6 minutes. And that's kind of what earned him the result in this one.
Yeah, and I think that having a guy like Espinal around the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and just, you know, competing more in domestic events is good, because he does have pretty a distinct kind of an international style. He's not like a guy who wrestled with a very collegiate style. And I think sometimes, Absolutely. You know, internally, domestically, everybody wrestles very similarly. And then you go internationally, you get an entirely different look. And he's a guy who gives sort of a European style. And I think that, you know, Abounader's seen that, but more guys getting that, even at the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, is a benefit.
Yeah, Espinal, I want to say, so he's wrestling under the Puerto Rican flag. I want to say he's of Cuban descent. Dominican descent. Mm. Right? Well, he wrestles similarly, like you said, kind of two Cubans, where it's like he's not afraid to let guys know on his legs. He'll score from some interesting positions. He'll kind of throttle down for a bit and then explode at times, which is not, again, the American style, which so often is attack, attack, attack.
All right. So speaking of attack, next up was Zain Retherford taking on Alec Pantaleo. And this was a match that happened multiple times in college. And every time Retherford was able to not only win, but get the fall, this match was much closer. And I think a key element to that was the size. I mean, Pantaleo was huge in this match. Retherford was moving up. And I think early in the match, Retherford was moving very well on the outside, and he was darting in and out. He was kind of getting to legs, but whenever he got close to a leg, it was just too much. The tree trunk legs were there. But as the match went on, I think that it kind of wore out Pantaleo, and then it was just Zain taking over. After getting a shot clock point in the first, Pantaleo, I guess Retherford got a shot clock point in the first. After the break, he scored on a double leg. Zain did a good job of avoiding giving up 4 on the double leg as it basically drove through. But then the pace took over, and they basically traded head fakes, and Retherford was able to get a single leg and finish clean, and that was the match 3-2.
Yeah, I think as much as the size, I think, played a bit of a factor, you also saw, and it's very silly to say that a 3-time national champion, 4-time All-American may not be the most athletic guy, but I think Pantaleo is a good bit more athletic in terms of explosiveness. And that's what gives some of the guys problems. I mean, it gave Jason Nolf some problems in college, in that he can use his athleticism and strength to limit opportunities and limit angles. I think you're really gonna see that help Pantaleo in the freestyle scene. In that he doesn't have to deal with top bottom. He can kind of conserve his energy. He can explode at times when he needs to, like we saw for the double. Almost similar to Frank Molinaro with in terms of scoring in flurries and big exchanges. I think you could see Pantaleo be a guy that ends up scoring a lot of fours, which I think is another thing we see with Molinaro. I think he's going to be really well suited to compete on the ladder for the next however many years he'd like to. And it was an interesting thing to see here. I don't know whether that match is necessarily as close the next time around. Should they see each other? I don't know whether Pantaleo can get down to 65. I would imagine he's going to be a 70 or 74 guy. But I think you see what Pantaleo's athleticism can do for him on the freestyle scene.
Yeah, I think that the comparison you made there is very apt. I think if he can get to a style where he is like Frank Molinaro, where he's keeping it close and then he's exploding for fours, I mean, yeah, that was a very good point because that really opened up my eyes because you saw a little bit of it in this match where the first period was close. He was controlling as best he could, and then he blasted through, almost got the 4. And, if that is a 4, that's a different match. So he's getting there. It's impressive stuff.
Yeah, I really like what they're doing out of Cliff Keen too. I think with the people he has around him, that people might be very surprised with how good some of the results that Alex Pantaleo comes up with in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. All right, another guy that everyone's excited to see where they go in the next few years, Jason Nolf, taking a match here against David McFadden. McFadden had a very good performance recently at Wrestling Underground, absolutely dominating Tommy Gant. And he was able to actually score the force points of this match as he got an exposure in a scramble, but then Nolf finished the takedown and he went on to win 5-2. This was interesting because the first period was, sort of a vintage Nolf situation where he was getting to attacks, initiating scrambles, and McFadden was willing to roll with him and engaged in the scrambles. And then in the second period, it really kind of slowed down. And I think in some ways it shows like a maturity for Nolf in that he knows this is an exhibition. He's not trying to get hurt out there. And, these are the kind of matches where it's win in advance when it comes around for, the trials. But at the same time, it's like, is that really the best way? Because part of his success is being wide open and going for this stuff. So I was curious to get your thoughts on that.
There was a lot of things that actually stood out to me in this match. First of all, I think McFadden was a little bit larger, but I thought Nolf looked as big as we've seen him. I mean, obviously it's as high as we've seen him compete in terms of weight limits, but he definitely looked much broader through the shoulders, and I thought looked much stronger and looked like a full-size 74, which I did not think, was the case in prior outings. 74, obviously it come up from 70, I think just 2 years ago. I think in the first period you saw, like you said, kind of came out high flying, and it was kind of like, okay, this is an exhibition. I kind of wanted to put on a show. It was doing some strange things that put him in some interesting positions to potentially give up exposures, was stepping over things, was getting into scrambles. And I think, like you said, the second period kind of came down to, okay, I'm going to wrestle a bit more within myself. I'm going to I want to win this match. Mm-hmm. Whereas it was less of, I want to put on a display, more so I want to get a result. And I think it was just kind of a smart match overall from Jason Nolf, particularly in the second period.
Absolutely. All right, so Nolf's former college teammate, Vincenzo Youssif, took on another former Penn State wrestler, Dan Vallimont. And I think this was a very vintage performance from Vincenzo Youssif, but I find that it was almost impressive in the way it was vintage, because I think that Youssif needs to be able to control ties and really be physical with his opponents. And I sometimes worry about guys coming from college taking on more adult wrestlers. And Vallimant's a guy who's been on the circuit for a long time. He's big, he's strong, he knows how to, use ties. And I thought that Youssif was pushing him around the mat and looked great. And, even though it was a 5-0 score, I thought that this was a very good sign for his prospects coming up in freestyle, because he really was able to look like himself against a guy who, on paper at least, could have some physical and experience advantages.
Yeah, Joseph's always been a guy kind of who I've always explained that he's very barrel-chested, almost like if any of you listeners have seen the old cartoons where like the guy walks into the bar and he's kind of just built. I mean, again, like a cylinder. That's always how I kind of viewed Vincenzo Youssif. And like you said, he was kind of able to control things. Everything was in the center of the mat until he wanted to move forward. It was very calm. He didn't rush exchanges. I think it was 0-0 at the break, I believe. Maybe 1-0 at the break.
Yeah, 1-0 shot clock.
And then kind of figured some things out. I thought it was a very mature performance, which is sort of like what you said, where he was kind of able to reassess at the break, able to determine where he can go and without giving up points and create exchanges where he can be successful in. It's going to be interesting to see what the post-Jordan Burroughs era looks like at 74 kilos. But I think that Vincenzo Youssif is going to be a tough out domestically for a lot of guys.
All right, so moving up the card, yes, once again, we head to the heavyweight division where Greg Kerkvliet dominated former Maryland wrestler Youssif Hemida with a 10-0 match termination victory. And I think, for me, this was the most impressive match on the card. Not that Kerkvliet won, because I think he was favored to do so, and I thought he would, but just the fact that he ran through Hemida. I mean, Hemida's a guy who was an All-American at Maryland, and he definitely always seemed better suited for freestyle, always had the better individual results in freestyle. And Kerkvliet he had nothing for Kerkvliet. Kerkvliet scored basically at will. He moved him on the feet. He got to legs when he wanted to. And, I mean, I know it's freestyle, but if you're someone who's, like an Iowa fan, you should be terrified that this guy's coming next year, most likely for Penn State, because he looked fabulous.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I thought Kerkvliet would win this match, but man, it wasn't the match. I mean, it was every bit the blowout that we talked about last week with Stevenson and Trent Hilger. But Hemida, no offense, Trent Hilger has a little more polish in freestyle. And there's also he's a big man, Youssif Hemida is. And it again wasn't even close. We talk about athletes and we talk about with Gable Stevenson being an elite athlete at 125 kilos. That's another guy, Kerkvliet, who, I mean, he's like 6'4", and I don't know what he weighed in at, but what, 250, 260, I think? And was there an ounce of fat on the guy? You're looking at a guy that's built like an NFL defensive end, moves like an elite athlete, and seemingly is just getting better and better. Yeah, he's for real. I don't know whether it's too soon to put him in the discussion with guys like Gwizdowski and Gable, because we haven't quite seen the results. But would it completely blow you away if he was on the team next year?
Right. I don't think it would. And I usually don't put in too much stock into stuff you hear coming out of the room, but listening to David Taylor talk about Kerkvliet on the call, he talked about how he always grabs a guy, wants to work with guys. He's a great training partner. And, David Taylor's a guy who, if he doesn't respect someone in the room, you probably will know it. And you could tell that he had a very high impression of this young man. And I think, with the way guys develop in that locker room, I mean, I think the sky's the limit for this guy, for sure.
And you're talking about he's now in a room with David Taylor and Kyle Snyder and Bo Nickal and Anthony Cassar, and Cale Sanderson and Jake Varner. So,
right, yeah.
So it's not like he's not getting every type of look you can imagine. It's really, really scary to think about the fact that he's 19 years old, 20 years old.
All right, so perhaps one of the bigger upsets on the night, Logan Massa was able to defeat Bekzod Abdurakhmonov. I don't really know how to say this per se, but I think that Bekzod kind of played into Massa's style. Massa's a guy who's very defensive, very strong defensively, and I thought Bekzod came out and was looking to get on the board early, and when none of that worked out, the match slowed, and then it was in Massa's wheelhouse. once late in the third period, or in the second period, I should say, the pace really slowed, and Bekzod tried to go for a double leg, and Massa hit him with the chest lock. He was going for it the whole time, and that just turned out to be the deciding factor. He won 4-3. He scored with the chest lock exposure as well as 2 step outs versus Bekzod's 1 takedown and the shot clock point.
Yeah, Massa for a while now has been as good as anybody at scoring off his opponent's offense in terms of creating exposures and I wouldn't call it cheap points, but to an extent those. If you go back and look at his match from, was it World Team Trials or maybe even been 2016 Olympic Team Trials against Mark Hall, they went back and forth in terms of scoring exposures off each other's shots. And it just showed how good Logan is. He's so strong. And he looked as big as ever, I thought, in this match. And it was just very, very smart game planning, I thought, from Logan Massa against a guy in Bekzod, Abdurakhmonov, who's beaten just about anybody and everybody at that weight. I was pretty impressed with Logan in this one.
Yeah, this match was at 77 kilograms, and he looked every bit of that, which is more than Bekzod usually competes at and more than Massa usually competes at as well. So, absolutely. All right, so we return to the women's side of things as Jane Valencia takes on Julia Salata. This was almost a carbon copy of the first ladies match we had on this card, but in the end, Valencia scored a takedown in the third period with only 2 seconds left on the clock to win it 6-6 on criteria. She also scored a takedown very early in the match and hit a leg lace for an exposure. In the interim, Salata put up 6 points of her own with 2 takedowns and a gut wrench. So it's one of those things where on criteria, where I'm sure we're going to talk about that later in the main event, but I thought the ability to pull out that takedown almost at the very last second of the match with 2 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah, I thought this was another fantastic match. Valencia kind of got up early and looked great early, and you're like starting to think, oh, is she going to be able to get the legs all match? And is this going to be close? And Salata made some adjustments and was able to score a takedown of her own. I thought her parterre offense looked good. I think if you asked Salata, and obviously hindsight's 2020, she probably gives up the step out there at the end to make it 6-5 or just kind of backs off. I think it was very unlikely in that situation that she would have got caution two'd and probably walks away with the victory. So that's one that's going to eat at her. But I think if you're looking at where am I at wrestling-wise going into a very important time period, I think both of them are going to be pretty happy. Valencia, who's already qualified for the Olympics, and Salata, who's going to be trying to come for that spot at World Team or Olympic Team Trials.
Yes, Jane Valencia competes for Mexico, and she qualified. She believes she upset a world medalist from Canada to make the qualification at Pan Americans. So a serious competitor there for sure. All right.
I believe the first woman from Mexico to ever qualify for the Olympics in wrestling.
And she's a Nittany Lion member?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. So speaking of Nittany Lion members and new ones, Gilman, Thomas Gilman, who moved over from Iowa and the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. And I guess we'll get right into it. I think if you're a fan of Gilman, you're hoping that going to Penn State sort of changes, adapts, improves his style. And I think it was interesting that he literally scored 6 step-out points to start this match. So he definitely was still Iowa style going forward.
I'm watching this match, I'm thinking, he wants to move you to the boundary and then create exchanges at the boundary. And it led to an early Cruz takedown, I believe.
So Cruz scored the first takedown very early, and then Cruz scored another takedown early in the second period when Gilman was just pushing. Then Cruz was basically gassed, and Gilman kept coming, and he scored. So he finally got a takedown after he built a 6 points with the step outs, and then he scored an exposure and 2 more takedowns to win it. But yes, at times it looked like Gilman was going to just keep pushing and Cruz was going to be able to get takedowns, and takedowns are better than step outs. But then I think Gilman's cardio took over and he pushed it.
Yeah, I think that really was what this match came down to. I think that Darian Cruz kind of had enough for 4 minutes and Thomas Gilman had enough for 6. And at the end, it was just the difference in cardio was not particularly close, and Gilman really opened it up. I thought there was also a little bit of a size difference. This was competed at 59 kilos, so 130 pounds. And Cruz has always been, I mean, a pretty tiny guy, even for 57 kilos, whereas Gilman is not. So I thought that was kind of a big part of Gilman's ability to move him around the mat as well. There were times where it looked like if he would have walked him straight out of the Ramada in State College, he would have done so.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. I thought the Gilman move, which we could talk about for half an hour, was a little strange to begin with, just because it's interesting. I'm curious to see who his training partners are going to be there. But he looked like Thomas Gilman, which isn't a bad thing. He's still going to be one of the top threats to make team 57 kilos, and he's still going to be in just about every match he wrestles.
Yeah, and I think David Taylor mentioned on the broadcast that I think, working from an underhook is much more beneficial in freestyle. And I think Gilman sort of developed that when he was in that Final X series, I believe, against Dayton Fix. And I think he's incorporated that more and more into his game. And I think that on one hand, it gives him an advantage against guys like this. On the other hand, it could sort of stunt his offense against some of the more international guys who are used to seeing just like an underhook fight.
I think you really hit the nail on the head. And one of the criticisms I've had of Thomas Gilman over the last 2-3 years since his world medal was that I think he's become more underhook reliant. I don't know whether that was a Thomas Gilman decision or a Mark Perry decision. Well, I guess we'll see more of that now that the two have split up. But I think you've seen less of a variety of attacks and more of a Thomas Gilman who wants controlled ties, walk you off the mat and just try to wear you down, which I think makes it very hard to separate in matches and leaves you open to matches where you control but don't necessarily win, which is what we saw. I mean, he controlled the first 3 minutes of this match and found himself down in the second period. Because, like you said, twos are better than one. But it'll be very interesting to see if that adapts at all between now and trials, because I think it might need to.
So on the last show, we talked about Gable Stevenson versus Trent Hilger being a match that we saw already and we knew how it was going to go. And I think this next one was also like that. Kyle Snyder taking on NCAA champion Mike Machiavello. And, I think Machiavello had his moments in this fight. There were a couple times where he was able to scramble out of takedowns and force stalemates. But, Kyle Snyder recently beat Machiavello pretty handily, and this was a 12-0. The highlight was Snyder hitting he hit 2 4-point moves from the quad pod. The first one was pretty questionable, and the second one might have been a 2-2. But they gave him 4 both times. So 12-0 was the final.
Pretty questionable is certainly one way to put it. Kind of landed on his back and just kind of hung out there for a while. But, yeah, I think this was just kind of a matchup that was never going to go any differently. Machiavello is not a small guy by any means, but was just at 92 kilos a couple of years ago. This was contested at 99 kilos. You're talking about an Olympic champion, a world champ, a multiple-time world champ. So it was going to be a tough test from the jump for Machiavello. I thought you saw his athleticism on display a number of times, like you said, in the scrambles, in terms of not letting Snyder get the angles. But eventually Snyder he just puts his hands on you. He's so strong, and his cardio is so good that if he's pulling on your head, eventually he just wears guys down.
Right, and I think, we talked about this a little bit with Gilman, who relocated to Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, and Snyder did as well. And I think that, maybe people are hoping that he adds elements to his game and sort of diversifies. We didn't really see that here, but, I think also with the matchup, if he is working on new things, maybe not worth showing it here and saving some of that for the trials.
Yeah, I think I want to say his first event with Nittany Lion Wrestling Club was the Farrell last year, the year before. Time is lost on me at this point.
Yeah, I think in November.
So I have no clue how many years ago that was. But you saw, I thought his footwork was a little bit better. He was a little bit more active. But we're not really going to know until he's wrestling in trials against Jaden Cox, theoretically.
All right, so we have reached the main event, which was a showdown between Bo Nickal and Alex Dieringer, two Hodge Trophy winners. The excitement was palpable, and unfortunately, we ended up with a 1-1 match. And interestingly enough, Dieringer's points came in like the first 20 seconds of the match. Bo got an underhook and tried to go for a knee pick. Dieringer fought through that, and as he was backpedaling, he kind of dropped into a fireman's carry position. Bo was able to avoid the takedown, but ended up out of bounds for the step out. And then in the second period, Bo Nickal got the shot clock point to take the match on criteria. Um, first of all, I don't understand how anyone who watches a match like this can enjoy criteria. I understand the arguments for and against, but would have been better to see this match decided with the takedown. That's kind of inarguable in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. And also, I think when Dieringer has moved up to 86 kilograms for this cycle, this match was at 190 pounds. I think at these higher weights, this is the best course of action for Dieringer, is to slow these matches down, try to make them one-move matches. It's just that when he's faced the higher level competitors at these higher weights, he's struggled to get that one move. So I think on one hand, it is impressive that he's able to control the pace and slow it down against guys who are bigger. But on the other hand, you know, he's really got to hit that breakthrough move, and it really hasn't come against the better guys. Or the best guys, I should say. I mean, we're talking about some of the best wrestlers in the world, so I don't take anything away from him. But I think that if you had watched Dieringer before at this weight, at this level, this is not a surprising result.
So from a criteria standpoint, I was really glad that I didn't have to watch more of this match. Sorry, guys. I'm big fans of both and enjoy watching both wrestle, but I did not enjoy watching both wrestle in this particular instance. So by all means, end the match. The first exchange that you mentioned where Dieringer got the push out was really, really close to being a potential 4. I mean, it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, Nickal was able to get back and not expose at any point and was pointed out. But I'm just saying, had things happened differently, I mean, you might have been looking at 4-0. Maybe then Bo Nickal has to let it fly, and we're talking a much different match. But at this point, it just seemed like Nickal was kind of content to take his point, and once it was 1-1, play some defense. When Dieringer first came up from 79 kilos, I was kind of curious how he'd fare up another 7 kilos, and now he's all the way up at 190, which is just a kilo up, but he looks huge. Every bit as big as he needs to. I was kind of surprised at Nickal's inactivity and inability to get the legs, as good as Dieringer is. We've seen Bo Nickal get the legs on everybody not named Jaden Cox, and even on Jaden Cox, he got him deep on a high crotch a couple times and couldn't score at Final X. So that was a little startling. It's something Nickal's going to have to figure out because he announced apparently that he is coming down, staying at 86 kilos for trials. So he's going to be in there with Dieringer, with David Taylor, with, I believe, he'll be eligible by then. So you're going to have to figure out how to score, which has not been an issue in the past. And I don't think it will continue to be an issue. I think you're kind of just looking at a one-off type of thing. But that was a little eye-opening. I think both guys are right there, but right now, if you're David Taylor and you watch this match, you have to feel pretty good about where you're sitting.
That's true. What are the chances that Bo came out and he got to that underhook and he started driving almost for like a knee pick kind of or a throw, and he was like, man, this guy is incredibly strong. If I start trying to go for my throws and wrestle my wide open style, I'm going to end up getting forward. And that just shut it down.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. But we've also seen, if you watch his match at 92 kilos, granted this is U23s and there's still a strength difference. At 92 kilos against Sokolov in the World Finals there, he scored in 3 or 4 different ways. Was able to get to the high crotch, was able to get to an ankle pick, scored off an exposure, I believe. I thought it was a little surprising you didn't see him really drop to an ankle at all or even attempt to.
All right. Well, Clay, we have run out of matches. So we ran through the full 13-match card. Like I said at the top, I thought it was good. I enjoyed the event. I'm happy to have it. Wish the replay had been up earlier. But, And I mentioned this the last time we met. I really kind of like this age of the super match card because, while tournaments are great, this really gives us a chance to focus on the matches we have, and we can, run them down after the fact, but focus on them when we watch them. And I've been loving it. I hope they keep coming. We got Who's Number One coming up in a few weeks. And yeah, just keep coming till the trials. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're in a good time, and hopefully if things keep clearing out a little bit, we will get some more wrestling. We're supposed to have senior nationals apparently in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's coming.
Whether those happen is still questionable to me, but they seem intent to do it, so hopefully we get some good wrestling ahead of us.
All right, so yeah, I'll give you the chance if you want to plug your Twitter or any articles or anything you got coming up.
You guys can check me out at ByCSourTag on Twitter. Over at Black Shoe Diaries, we should have a good amount of wrestling content coming up. We're going to hopefully have some stuff over at the Open Mat as well. So check both of those out, and hopefully I'll be back with you soon.
All right, I'm Richard Mann, Richard A. Mann with 2 N's on Twitter. Intermat, I always got stuff coming up pretty much every week, taking the weekend off from MMA coverage, so enjoy that. I know I will. I'll be out of town. But big fight with Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa, so I'll be checking that out when I get back from vacation. Anyway, Clay, I'll talk to you next time.
See you.